There is a truly astonishing picture in the Times this morning of an apartment block in Dnipro in Ukraine that moments before was hit by a Russian missile. It's all wires and rubble and smoke. And if you look more closely, you see a figure with her hand to her mouth. This is 23-year-old Anastasia sitting up in her bed on the seventh floor. Her hand is actually over her mouth in shock. 30 people have been confirmed dead so far, and between 30 to 40 are believed to be trapped in the rubble. The building's just sliced apart. It's a horrendous picture. Richard Spencer, the Times' Middle East correspondent, is in Dnipro, and he's been speaking to Anastasia. Morning to you, Richard.
Morning. No, I have to confess, I haven't been speaking to Anastasia. She's recovering in hospital. What we have been able to do is read her Instagram, which
Right.
is, of course, how a lot of news gets out these days. She was posting pictures of herself from her hospital bed, and has replied to an outpouring of sympathy from all around Ukraine after these pictures appeared yesterday morning. As you say, a completely extraordinary picture of her suspended between sheets of broken concrete apparently in midair with a bathtub incongruously next to her. I mean, somebody said, "Oh, she's in her bathroom," but she says she's not. She's in her bedroom. It's just all the rooms have collapsed into one.
And what happened to the rest of her family?
Her parents are unfortunately dead. She writes that she has in this Instagram post. She wrote that she had no idea where her parents were, but the authorities, the rescue workers here have said they did find her parents. Unfortunately, they had been killed.
And she was saved because a door was shielding her. Is that right?
Yeah, she says that she says, as I say, all the rooms in the flat sort of came into her bedroom, as she put it, a door landed on her bed and covered her, and that seems to have spared her. Though, as we all know from these extraordinary, incidents, whether it's caused by a Russian missile or an earthquake, the way the buildings collapse do leave pockets of in which people survive. Another lady survived almost 24 hours in a similar position. I mean, not quite so visible, but one middle-aged woman was. We spoke to the fire crews yesterday, and they said they'd found this one woman alive after, I think, must have been there for about 21 or 22 hours. Trapped in her kitchen with the dead bodies of her daughter and her husband. She suffered only minor injuries herself. These things are quite random and obviously horrific.
Absolutely, just awful. And just a kind of footnote on Anastasia, that her boyfriend was killed last year while fighting for Ukraine. So she has been completely horrendously affected by what has happened. You've also been speaking, Richard, to some of the people, some of the men who signed up to fight. Who I don't want to use the word ordinary, because none of these people are ordinary, but these are people who obviously just took up arms. And one of them is a man who used to make saunas.
Yeah, they're certainly not ordinary anymore. But yes, a year ago they probably would have thought themselves as ordinary. I was on Saturday. I was in Bakhmut, which is now the front line in the east, in Donetsk province. After the Russians took most of this small town of Soledar, which is just to the north of Bakhmut. I mean, part of the aim of taking Soledar was to surround Bakhmut. So I was in Bakhmut on Saturday, and talking to some of the soldiers who were sort of taking a break from the front lines. Not by any means the experienced crack troops of the Ukrainian army. One guy, as you say, who was until a year ago working for a sauna manufacturer in Kiev. He'd been on the front lines out in the countryside to the east of Bakhmut, southeast of Bakhmut, and found himself surrounded by Russians in the forest, had no idea what was going on really. Another guy had been a casino operator on a cruise ship, and he likewise had found himself in a trench being bombarded by artillery. Again, not really sure what was going on. I mean, it's quite this is the nature of a war that came upon Ukraine so suddenly, because they're heavily reliant on volunteers who've signed up since the invasion in February. And that's the Ukrainian side. Of course, on the Russian side, you have all these tens of thousands of released convicts who've been recruited into this Wagner Group mercenary force, and that's the people who are doing the main fighting in the Bakhmut and Solidar areas at the moment on the Russian side.
In terms of these attacks on apartment blocks and buildings, Kharkiv, Odessa also hit on Saturday, in addition to Dnipro. Is this, it's quite hard for people, I suppose, in the UK to be able to gauge whether this is a kind of uptick in action or whether it's kind of always like this. I mean, this feels worse, but it also feels like it's occasional rather than constant. I mean, how would you assess the attacks and I suppose the frequency of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's constant. I mean, it's not. What we've seen is since September, particularly. I mean, we've seen these random missile attacks right from the beginning of the war. I mean, I was in Kiev in seeing some apartment blocks that have been hit in Kiev, but. What really changed in September was a determination to use cruise missiles and similar, really big, medium range missiles fired from planes or submarines against civilian infrastructure. I mean, that's a very bland word. The first targets were power stations, and in September, if you remember, there was a rash of power stations across the country hit, which took out at one stage more than half of Ukraine's power supply. The question always is, when they hit these civilian targets, really civilian targets, blocks of flats and so on, is that just a callous warning, as some people suggest, that Putin is saying here, look, you can defeat us on the battlefield, but don't think we'll go away. We're still here and we can still inflict damage, because of course Russia is a major military power with huge amounts of missile power and nuclear weapons, of course. So there's one theory that he's just saying, don't think I will don't think I'm ever going away. I mean, the other theory is that these missiles are just incredibly inaccurate. They're not high-end precision-guided missiles of the sort that Britain and America likes to think they use nowadays, and they just miss their intended targets like power stations and whack blocks of flats here and there. There was a power station about a mile and a half away from where this block of flats was yesterday. Who knows? Maybe that was the target, and but mile and a half, maybe two more, maybe mile and a half, 2 miles. That's quite a long range to miss by if you're
Yes.
even for a not particularly smart missile.